Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. Today's guest built and ran a business from 1,500 miles away back in the 90s before being a remote business was cool. John Seiffer was proving that a well-run company doesn't need you in the day-to-day in order to be successful. And since then, he has coached founders across all kinds of industries into being an engine of their business, being the CEO. And I've known lots of coaches. There's good coaches and then there's great coaches. And the great ones have a unique it to them. And I can tell you that John is one of those because he's the creator of CEO Bootcamp and the author of Output Thinking. And you'll hear in our conversation, when you flip this place on its head and you start thinking about outputs rather than process, right? Everybody talks about begin with the end in mind. Well, with output thinking, he helps you formulate what that output is. He's kicking off here in a couple weeks a program called Exit Ready Intensive. And what I really appreciate about John is that he just doesn't preach theory, right? He teaches business systems that actually reduce your workload while increasing your company value. And that's ultimately what everybody wants, is a saleable, valuable company. If you ever wanted to know what it really means to step back, scale up, or sell well, this is a conversation you want to hear. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with John Seiffer. Welcome to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks you, Ed. I really appreciate being here.
I wanted to start off with my first question was that, you were doing remote before remote was cool, right? And it seems as though you're hardwired to facilitate how you can operate a business that doesn't necessarily require you to be boots on the ground. Can you start there?
I think it has to do with, and I haven't ever been officially diagnosed with ADD, but a lot of entrepreneurs that I know have that squirrel, and I get bored doing the same thing over and over again. The way this happened with that company, I was living in Texas at the time, but I'm from the Northeast. I had this business going, and I really didn't enjoy the Texas summers. So I moved 1,500 miles away now. I had been in the company, had started it and run it for 2 years, so I kind of knew the ins and outs of it. They had to literally overnight me data tapes so that I could see what was going on. And this was a database that I had built myself, so I knew what was in there. And it kept growing, and I realized that I was working myself out of the jobs that I found boring. When I would come back, sometimes I would screw things up by saying, hey, what about this new idea? What about that new idea? And they just wanted to do their job, What I realized when I started working with other business owners, their being there physically, they were so in the weeds, they would obviously solve problems, but they wouldn't necessarily prevent the problems from happening again. And that's what I liked to do.
Did you think that by being on site, that the business owner gets their serendipity? They get ideas by being there, being in the action. You know what I mean? I know a ton of business owners that they just have to be there. And it's really interesting because they sit there and cry poor, right? I can't do this because of economic reasons, or better yet, I can do it for economic reasons. I just want to be there so I'm ensure that it's done right. I don't think that's right. What do you see?
I had a client one time, they call it advanced manufacturing. It was his dad's machine shop. He took it over. It'd been going on for 50 years. All the production work was overseas now. But so they were doing very high-end Department of Defense work, FAA stuff. He had about 50 employees and, 5-axis CNC machines and everything. And he said, I just go back in the shop and I can hear it all humming. And that's kind of how I know it works. And I said, well, you told me you wanted to double the size of your company. I said, that's not going to work to double because the noise level isn't going to double. You have to get more procedural. He was a guy that I call grandma in the kitchen with no recipe makes great food, but that's not scalable. And if you look at any sizable restaurant, whether it's a McDonald's chain or a Michelin star restaurant, they have recipes, they have processes, they repeat that so that, first of all, it can scale. Secondly, it's not dependent on any one person.
It's funny you say that because the business owner, at least a lot of them, there comes a point in size where you get out of orbit, right? Where you're not that guy anymore. And I'm curious to know what that threshold is, because for the most part, I see these business owners, to your point, they are the business and they want to be part of the business, even though they can say, work on the business, not in the business, and so on and so forth. There's no way.
So look, the way I say it is, look, it's your business. You can do whatever you want with it. You just need to understand the ramifications of what you do. So I live in Pittsburgh, and for the first 10 years I was in here, I had a 120-year-old house. So I had a lot of contractors come in, Almost none of them had websites. My plumber was an example of this. He had a crew. He was able to take vacations 2 or 3 times a year. He had as much business as he wanted. He didn't want any more. And he's what I call a stage 1 company. There's a guy named John Brown had a book about exits, and he talked about the different stages of a company from the value of the company when you're exiting, stage 1, 2, and 3. I adapted that to what does the owner or the CEO focus on. And in a stage 1 company, they focus on customer related things. They're doing the sales, they're doing the fulfillment. They may have a team, but the team is there to help them do better. At a stage 2 company, the owner is focused internally. They have people responsible for sales. They have people they can depend on to do the fulfillment. They are building the sales team or the informational structure within the organization. They're putting the systems and processes in place so that the company can scale. Stage 2 companies are, first of all, they're worth a lot more. Secondly, they can crank out a whole lot of income and profits to the owner. Then the stage 3 company is what's now being called a holdco, where often they're buying other companies, they're doing M&A, and they're now focused outward again, but not on the customer. They're now focused on the industry. So it's a very different structure. And some people don't want to go from stage 1 to stage 2. That's fine, as long as you understand that. And it helps if you don't have a lot of investors or debt. If you're bootstrapped, you don't have to pay anybody else. So,
well, I know before we got started, you started talking about the owner being customer focused, and you've been kind of noodling on deep dive in that. Why don't we talk a little bit more about being customer focused and how to get out of there? To your point, I think so many people are under the impression they're out of it, but they really haven't. They're still customer focused.
Well, you can't ever stop thinking about it.
Sure.
And that is the thing about being a business owner. It's 24/7 in your mind. I call it the shower dimension. What are the things that pop into your mind when you're in the shower? Are they about this deal? I need to follow up with that client. If that's true, then you are customer focused. If the things that are popping up are about your team, then you're internally focused on building the organization. That's one way to look at it.
Is there particular revenue thresholds?
It depends on the industry, exactly.
Right.
So, at one extreme, it's a practice, not actually a business. So like a neurosurgeon, they're probably making, $750,000 a year, but it's them. In a trade kind of business, it's probably maxes out at 200 to 300K, and they're probably taking home most of that as far as revenue. The real complexity issue is how many people you have and how many of them are managers. That's where things get different.
The composition of buyers is just massive right now. Everybody wants to buy a business. The thing is that everybody's reading about this, right? And you got to put a manager in place. You got to basically positioning yourself to exactly as you're describing. Now, my question is, how do you do that? Or can you do it as a buyer's looking at a seller's business? How do you know, right?
Here's the dilemma, because I've worked with searchers and I've worked with people who have just bought companies. And when you're in the searching process, and particularly when you're in the due diligence phase, you're really looking at the numbers. and you're getting, quality of earnings people, and you're doing all that. You don't know how those numbers are produced. How many of them are produced by what I call grandma in the kitchen? These are experts. They are very intuitive. They have a lot of experience, but they're not very process oriented. And the other extreme is what I call dams. It's a system that is documented. There's somebody who's accountable. There's metrics involved, and it's subdivided so that there's division of labor. And that's what makes a company scalable. Now, when you're searching, when you're in due diligence, you don't always get to talk to the people who are producing those numbers. So you don't know. I've developed a number of questions that you can ask the seller to look behind the answers that they give you. Where do you keep the documentation of your SOPs, your standard operating procedures? How do you train a new person in this particular job? Well, they say, well, we just put them out there and they shadow somebody who's good and whatever. Well, that means they don't have a documented SOP. Even if they have one or have them, and there's going to be dozens, maybe hundreds in some companies, are they up to date? Are they reviewed on a regular basis? Because what you don't want is, oh, yeah, here's what the book says we do, but here's how we really do it. And that works to a point until it doesn't. So that's one question you can ask. The other questions you can ask are, well, tell me about your last vacation. What you really want to know is when they were on vacation, how many times did they get interrupted? How did things get handled? If things were just worse and things piled up till they got back, well, that's not scalable. Now, good news, bad news. When a company is dependent on the owner, it's usually less valuable. If the owner can walk away and customers may not even know it, many of the employees, they would know it, but it doesn't affect their day-to-day work, that company is more valuable. Depending on which systems those are, some of them can be easy to fix. So accounts payable, accounts receivable, if that depends on somebody who's been there for 25 years and they know all this stuff, that's easy to systemize. If it's, oh, this is our secret sauce, this is our recipe for Coca-Cola, and that's going to go away when the seller goes away, that's something you want to document.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing that keeps coming up is that the business owner with technology, and we started to talk about this before, is, to me, it's getting harder and harder to have the excuse of I don't have SOPs, right? There's just so many tools out there that, especially for those knowledge workers or those that are behind the desk, you got Loom, you've got all kinds of tools that can literally help you. To your point, that may be the higher level AP, AR, that kind of thing. But boy, it's really easy these days to memorialize how you do things when you're sitting in front of a computer.
Oh yeah, it's easy to do. The trick is you want to memorialize a good way of doing it, not a stupid way of doing it. Particularly when you start moving, not just documenting it, but actually saying, well, could this be automated? Whether it's AI or any kind of automation, you don't want to automate a bad process.
When you're working with clients, how far in the weeds do you get? And I'll tell my audience, because I do think that this is important. And I've worked with a lot of coaches. And as I said before we got started, how I knew you had some serious horsepower was how, after we got done talking, how quickly I received deliverables, how quickly I received the information that we talked about, and basically a summary. And that, to me, will tell you all you need to know about a coach. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is how do you work? I mean, how deep do you get? And are you dealing with boards? Are you dealing with one person? How does that work for you?
So I do a couple of things. One is I do facilitation for a leadership team, usually around an annual plan or a problem-solving thing like that. That's a 4 or 5 day situation, and it's done. The thing I do most often is one-on-one coaching with a business owner. And it's a combination of coaching and consulting. And my working definition is a consultant brings expertise in from the outside that you don't have. And a coach helps you maximize the expertise that you do have. If you think about it in sports, a tennis player, they'll have a coach looking at them from the outside going, I think you're putting too much weight on your back foot here, or let's change your diet for a few weeks and see what happens, and things like that. That's the expertise that they're maximizing. My clients come to me when they're frustrated, that something is not working, something could be working better, and they don't know how to get there. I mean, they're smart people. If it's simple, they would have figured it out. And so I look at that through the lens of every company at the top looks the same. They have to make something people want to buy. They have to find those people and sell to them. They have to do it over and over again, track the money, hire people, do the, all that kind of stuff. At the nitty gritty of how do you do that, that's where it differs. And so I go down as deep as they need me to go. I don't do the SOPs for them, but I can teach them either how to do it or how to hire somebody to do it or that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, that leads me to output thinking. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So Output Thinking was a book that I wrote based on the major frustration that I'd seen with clients over the years. And that is, you hire somebody not to do the work, but to produce the results of that work, the outputs. It's a very subtle distinction, but the example I use is, if you get in your car to go to the grocery store, you're not there to drive. You're there to be at the grocery store. That's the result. Many times when we hire people, we haven't really specified what a good result looks like. Part of the reason is because entrepreneurs tend to be very quick and very intuitive and not very procedural. And the other part is we don't want to be micromanagers. If it's important, yeah, you do have to be that way. And you have to explain why. So we look at what's getting in the way of that. And it turned out to be they weren't specifying what the outputs looked like. So outputs, at one level, it looks obvious. Okay, you make a hamburger, you make a sale, you make a thing. That's an obvious output. But so is a change in status. A janitor doesn't make the room, they make it clean. An inspector doesn't make the part, they change it to approved or rejected. Behaviors are attitudes. Decisions are outputs. I mean, solving problems, solving a certain kind of problem is an output. Relationships are outputs. And this goes back to what we were talking about before about sellers. When a person has run their company for a while, they have a number of relationships directly with vendors, with customers, with employees, etc. Those relationships are going to go away. And those need to be replaced by somebody who's coming in. All those things are outputs. That's what you hire somebody for. And if you don't specify that, then they're not going to do a good job, or you're going to get frustrated.
I know everybody I talk to has challenges with hiring these days. Let's say the 22 to 30-year-olds are a different breed these days, right? And they have different motivations. The 30 to 45s, again, have different. Then we move into our vintage, and we can do anything for anybody, right? With the clients you worked with and the hires for the output, is there a differentiation between them?
I don't look at it in terms of ages because, I'm a boomer. And so people are like, oh, the boomers, they don't know how to do this or they don't know how to do that. Or they think everything's like this. I'm a very tech savvy guy. And a lot of people my age are not. There's not a stereotype that works all the time. But what I do say is if you are hiring somebody, you should describe what a good job looks like in such a way that if they came in the middle of the night and did a good job and left before you came to work, how would you know? What would you see? So first of all, you have to do that. Then secondly, people talk about, oh, we got to hire for culture. We got to hire for attitude. We got to hire for values. And I say, great. How do you see those values? And they say, well, we're transparent. Well, what does that mean? What do you say? We're about, honesty. Well, what does that mean? How do you see it? If you can't describe how that shows up in behavior, you haven't described it well. What you're really doing is saying, this is a person I'd like to go have a beer with, and I'll know it when I see it. And that's not scalable.
Output thinking is exactly that this is what the result should be, and let's back up from there. But how does the business owner, if they don't know excellence in the process, excellence in the result? Because, I've seen so many business owners cobbled a business together, and they're making a fortune, right? And it's like, well, I don't know how I do it.
They do know. Here's the thing. They do know. They just often know it intuitively and not in a way they can explain. So I worked with a lawn care company for a while. And they said, well, our goal is delighted customers. I'm going, okay, well, what does that mean? How do you delight a customer? Well, the way you do it is you show up on time. You show up with a clean truck. You show up with people who are dressed well, who can handle the problem, who can speak to the customer if they need to. We started putting together, while you're there, you take a picture of what you did and you send it to people. Those are all behaviors, outputs that can be documented and trained. If you just say to somebody, we got 5 trucks on the road, here's each crew, your job is to delight the customer. Well, some of them are going to give the job away for free. That's going to make a customer happy. Some of them are going to do all kinds of stuff. But you can specify what that is.
So when you're coaching someone to specify what that is, whatever that is, are there any probing questions that go, oh, you know what? That's my North Star?
Well, the first one is, it's not even the North Star. It's like when somebody says, well, this is really a problem. I say, well, how does that problem show up? How do you see it? What do you hear? Not what judgment did you come to about their attitude. When somebody says, well, they got a bad attitude, what does that mean? Does that mean they didn't smile? Does that mean they were late? Does that mean they had a grumpy tone of voice? Those are all things you can change. Attitude is hard, but it manifests itself in specific ways. Now, that's a little more personal oriented, but specifically, you want to be able to do a job. You want to be able to do a job well. What does a good quality job mean to the customer? And what does it mean to do it on time? And how long should it take? And what should it cost? And all that kind of stuff.
Shame on me for, thinking about something else while you're talking. But I was thinking about the shop here, and I'm going, all right, we get a deal done, right? We did a great job. We got the deal done. What does that mean, right? And okay, we got the job done. We're likely going to get more business. People get referred. We got deal teams and so on and so forth. But I'm sitting here going, I'm not certain, even after 45 years that we've been in business, I'm sitting here going, I'm not certain I know the answer to that question.
So I'll bring up something that I cover in the book when I talk about SOPs and documenting operating procedures. If you're documenting how you do something on a computer or physically with a machine, how do you fix a lawnmower part? Those are what I call recipe SOPs. So step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this, whatever. There's a whole nother kind of stuff which is more applicable to your business where you're dealing with people. And you can't exactly tell somebody, this happens in customer service, this happens in sales. You can't tell somebody what to say next. And you don't want it to be scripted. That's not going to work. But you can say, this is the output that we're looking for from this conversation before we move on to the next piece. So you probably have some things. Let's say in your process, you have one of enrolling a seller, getting a listing. Then you have some processes around publicizing that listing. Then you probably have some processes about qualifying a buyer. I couldn't tell you, and you probably couldn't tell me, the specific repeatable steps of qualifying a buyer. But you could tell me, here's what I need to know before that buyer is either qualified or disqualified. And how somebody gets there is a dance. But I can very well define what a good qualified buyer looks like.
I'll bet you 80% of our practice is referral business. So that's always been my gauge, right? It's like, well, yeah, clearly we're doing a good job. People are referring us. I thought about, and I see a lot more of it, is the net promoter score on everything everybody does. I don't know if that's a tool or you like it, or I'm seeing it more.
See, I think people gravitate to tools like that because they think it's easy and powerful. And in certain contexts, it is. But it was developed by Bain, who dealt with large corporations. And if you're doing Procter & Gamble and Tide, detergent or whatever, you can ask people this. And you get tens of thousands of responses and the patterns make sense. If you have a plumbing company, maybe it'll work. I would say, let's say you're in your situation, the fact that you're getting referrals is powerful. If you were to ask those people on a scale of 1 to 10, would you recommend it? You might get a very different response, but the fact that they're referring you is obvious.
To your point, right, about making something saleable, it's not. I've been thinking about this a lot lately for our clients as well as anybody that is concentrated on there's talent within these four walls. There's talent of the business owner. And in my case, I've got partners that are aging out, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of business comes from them, right? And how do you transition? Because we're in that vintage, right? How do you transfer to the next level, right? Is it more of a mentorship and you work simultaneously and gradually change? Or is it, I'm going to build you an SOB on how to be Ed? I don't think you're going to like that one.
No, and as the business grows, not everybody needs to interact with Ed, but they do need to interact with somebody who has some of the qualifications that Ed has. So they need to interact with somebody they can trust. They need to interact with, so trust is buildable. Trust means you do what you say you're going to do, and you do it when you say you're going to do it. Do that over and over and over again. It builds trust. If somebody doesn't do that, that's a behavior. It's probably simple, but not easy, But they need to be knowledgeable. They need to have some experience. They need to know what the pattern looks like and what the outliers of those patterns are. And that's what you get from being in the business for so many years. You see those outliers.
In Indiana here, and I'm certain it's in the other in other states too, but the state government is actually getting behind business sales and acquisitions, which is great because they're recognizing that you're going to have to self-populate entrepreneurship, and where they're focused at and they're more concerned about is in the rural communities, right? So to your point, your buyer may be on the bench in your own business, right? So if you're going to extract that value, part of it is that buyer, right? And that seller, that's probably how you're going to extract a lot of your value. And you should, because the risk is going to reduce, because everybody knows Bob. He's been with Jim for 30 years, right? And, he was working with him in his high school. And so to me, I think that that's a big one. But I'd like to hear your perspective, especially on those, I don't want to say non-marketable businesses, but, there's a lot of businesses that are outside urban areas that are, will evaporate if somebody doesn't do something.
I think that's very, very true. As fewer and fewer people work in rural areas, it's harder to have a local customer base. If you have a B2B business that can scale outside your local base, then that's more scalable. As far as turning it over to an employee, actually, I'm about to be the kickoff speaker for a thing called Exit Ready. And my talk is about how to get yourself out of your business. But all the other people, most of whom I know very well and I really respect, they're going to be talking about how the deal gets done and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things you're talking about is you have somebody who's been working for you for a long time. They may not have the money to buy you, but they need some outside infusion. That's where these other guys are going to talk about how to do that. There's ESOPs and there's ways of incentivizing revenue into the future and that kind of stuff. But if you can keep that continuity going, because people like to deal with people that they know and people like to deal with people that they trust, if you can't keep that continuity going, you can still build up trust in a different way. You just have to work a little harder at it.
I'm curious to know, though, as we were talking about it, building SOPs and building kind of the knowledge base around the concentration of value, say the owner, right? You've got the guy or the man or woman, whoever's been working with you. I think that helps, right? And then it helps, especially if they become your successor, because now it reduces the risk. To your point, the easiest way to do a job is not do it, right? And you start not doing it and start seeing that, maybe there's some ways to take your chips off the table, or, certainly the SBA is coming along and doing a ton of, they're doing a lot of buyouts, partner buyouts and things like that. But I think it's going to be a big thing for you. If I could crystal ball it, I think there's a ton of work to be people being coached on that transition, on how are you going to extract your value when your value is tied to you, but you have a ready-made buyer. And I'm a big advocate for that person, those two or three people that helped you create all this wealth, they should be your first stop, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And the thing about business, like I was talking about before, you have the neurosurgeon who's got a practice. Yeah. They're not going to be able to replace themselves in that role. But with a business, it's usually easier to do that.
Well, you started to talk about exit ready intensive. So let's go down that path.
So this is a thing that Ryan Ray put together, and it's a 10-week program. Each week is an hour long where there's a speaker on each topic, taxes and the deals and the QV and all that good stuff. That'll be videoed, and there'll be a time for questions and answers and stuff like that. So, and like I said, I'm the kickoff speaker. My talk is about how do you increase the value of your business by getting yourself out of the day-to-day stuff.
How do you quantify that? Is it economic or is it time or is it both? I'm curious to know when you're exit ready, right? And you're working yourself out. How do you get out of the way in order to move to a level 2 business, right? How will you know when you're there? Are you quantifying it from a financial? Are you quantifying it from a time, or both, or it's just a gut feeling?
No, it's not a gut feeling. The first step is to take just a spreadsheet. Could be on paper, could be electronic, whatever makes you happy. And then as you go through your day, jot down the outputs that you are producing. And what I mean by that is, I don't care that you spend an hour on email. What's the output of that email? Was that a sale? Were you emailing to solve a problem with the machine? Were you hiring somebody? Those are the outputs. So you jot down those. And then at the end of the day, you look at how frequently do those things happen? And which ones of those can you get rid of by training somebody else? People's gut reaction is to say, nobody can do it better than me. Well, that's obviously not true. Like I said before, decisions are an output. Relationships are an output. Which of those are you being tasked with? And then go through and say, which are the simplest ones, either the simplest ones I can get rid of by training somebody else, or the most frequent. Because some of those outputs have to be done every day. Some of them don't have to be done but weekly. Some of them but monthly. Well, if you get rid of the more frequent ones, then it doesn't depend on you as much.
The latest and greatest is AI and automation. You're up to speed on a lot of this. How do you say you need a body? Or like, all right, let's explore, this bot, this agent, this AI, right?
So I don't say you need a person to do it. You need the thing done. That's the output. What's the most effective and efficient way to get that done? Usually what you find is that a very intuitive, expert person will be doing lots of little outputs that don't all need them. I'm in Pittsburgh. There's a guy who recently passed away, a doctor named Freddie Fu, and I think he was the first one to do this. He was an orthopedic surgeon. I don't know if he was the first, but he would have 2 operating rooms when he was doing knee replacements or things like that. And he would have another crew prepare the patient, and he would just jump in at the end to do the really critical stuff, and then he would move, and somebody else would, put the patient back together. And he was able to just do those little things that were so critical and not the intermediate steps. So contrast that with a client that I'm working with who's got 3 salespeople. They're all on commission only. The problem with commission only is you've basically given up on the ability to manage people. There's a process in sales, which is, first of all, initiating the relationship, deepening the relationship, closing the deals, etc. Well, if one person is in charge of all of that, they're probably not good at all those stages. If you can subdivide that, you now have division of labor, and you can say, you know what, this part's really marketing. We could have a really good marketer to bring in the leads. Then we have somebody else who's really good at qualifying those leads. And then somebody else who's really good at putting the proposals together and the pricing. And obviously the details matter by industry. But if you can break those things down into the division of labor that's required, then it's easier to say, oh, this part could be outsourced, or this part could be automated, or whatever.
Interesting. Well, it's funny you say that, because I'm back to this practice. I've got 17 commission guys, and I've been wrestling with this whole thing, division of labor. Like back in the day, right? It was easy. You list a house, you make your little profile, and off you go. And this whole deal making industry was built off the model of real estate, right? And so the good news is that it's evolving, right? It's behaving more like an investment bank where you have that division of labor, but that's in a support role as opposed to if you could have greater output, would you yield some of that income if you are making more throughput? Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So you and I have been doing this for a long time. So how's the business owner changed over the course of your career?
I think it's gotten more financial.
Okay.
And particularly now when you have the searchers and the people who are coming out of Wall Street or private equity and they say, I don't want to work in an investment bank. I want to own something. But they're looking at it as if they were just looking at a deal. And the deal's not the end. The deal's the beginning. I like to say deals are sexy, but the money's made in operations. It's kind of the opposite of real estate. Real estate, you make the money by buying a property in the right location, which you can't change, and a property that's got good bones, which you could change, but it's expensive. And then you operate it. A business is the other way around. Once you buy it, even if you want to sell it or build a whole company and not be the operator, eventually it has to operate. It has to be productive. It has to be profitable. It has to throw off cash. That goes into all the stuff we've been talking about.
I totally agree with you. On the sell side, though, as many buyers, to your point, as there are these days, I think it's giving sellers a false sense of security over how great their business is. The buyers that are looking at it aren't necessarily operators, right? They're looking at the spreadsheets. They're looking at, what can be done from a spreadsheet as opposed to ops. The money's made in operations. Our last 20 deals, we've had 160 buyers for each of those deals. That's on average, right? So those many people coming through, those many opportunities to buy that company, how does that seller recognize, like, this guy gets it, right?
Sellers tend to group in two extremes. One is they really want the best deal they can get financially. They just want to take the money, go buy a boat, sit on the beach, drink pina coladas, whatever. But the other extreme, they care a lot about their employees and the legacy and what's going to happen to the business after they're gone. And so they would want to vet the buyers from those two categories.
Have you seen any tripwires of this makes a really good buyer? Somebody that you talk to them for 5 minutes and it's like, yeah, you know what? And vice versa. This is the 5 minutes I talk to a seller, right? So give them both to me.
So it's really based on, first of all, as a seller, you want to know yourself. What are you in this for? How much of your ego, and I don't mean that in a bad way, is tied up in the fact that this is a business that I built and I want my name on it and et cetera. And I want that to last in my community. Or, no, I just want the most money I can get. And so first of all, you know that. And secondly, you talk to the buyers and ask about their history. What got them into searching? Why are they looking at a business at all? And why are they looking at this business? What's the appeal? Is it geographic? Is it the industry that they're familiar with? Are they running away from something because of a 100-hour-a-week job that they hate? Or are they running for something?
That's funny you say that. There's a lot of that. A lot of the buyers can get the at-bat, right? And then they start digging and they can't see themselves in that business. Or they realize that, oh, not only am I CEO, but I'm also head janitor. Yeah, that doesn't work. That really doesn't work for me.
I knew a guy whose business card literally said president/janitor. So I bumped into him a few years later and it said owner/janitor. And I said, what happened to president? He said, well, we got up to about 35 employees and I got so tired of talking to them. I made somebody else the president.
Good for him. Well, and again, business ownership isn't for everybody. Even though as romantic as everybody's making it these days, this is a full contact sport that you just have to understand what you're getting yourself into. And there's a couple people I've seen online that are like, this isn't for the faint of heart. If you're in it, you better strap on because it is not for the faint of heart.
Well, the media, whether it's social media or any other kind of media, they give you a false impression because they're dealing with stories that are exciting.
Yeah.
15 years ago, it was these, oh, man, you just start a business and then, you get 12 guys together and you sell it to Facebook for $1 billion. And everybody's, oh, yeah, we're going to do that. As if, and now it's like, oh, you can just buy a HVAC company and roll it up and make this holdco. And, nothing's ever as easy as it looks.
Yeah, if there was one piece of advice that you could give the business owner that either would make it more saleable or make it more valuable, what would that piece of advice be?
Get yourself out of the day-to-day. Get it to where it doesn't depend on you to be a going, profitable concern.
Got it. Are you taking on new clients? I guess is my first question.
At the moment, I have a couple of slots open.
Okay.
I mostly work with people that we gravitate to each other and we both feel like there's a good fit. So that's why I give everybody a free coaching session. And it's really a coaching session. It's not a sales pitch. And then some people, that's it. They don't know me. I don't know them. We talk for a while and it's great. Other people, we go further. So that all of that stuff is on my website at ceobootcamp.com.
How else can people find you? I know you're active on the socials. I'll have that. But you have a particular flavor of getting in touch with you?
The best thing to do is email. I long for the days when everything came through email and I didn't have to look at my text and my LinkedIn and my this and my that. Just have it in one place. John at ceobootcamp.com.
I'll have everything in the show notes. And my friend, thanks so much. And it was just a joy to have you.
Pleasure's mine.
Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.